Karthik Ramasamy, one of the engineering leaders at Splunk, and Arun Kejariwal, a seasoned engineering leader at leading technology companies. Welcome to the Data Exchange podcast. And
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ben. I'm glad to be here.
And
Thanks, Ben.
so many reasons to have you folks on in this podcast just based on the work you do. But one of the things that now that we've had a newsletter running for the last 6 months, one of the things I've noticed is anytime I post links about hiring engineers or tips for interviews for engineers, a lot of people love content like that. So I wanted to have you folks on because you're now on the hiring side. So maybe you can provide our listeners some tips so that they can excel at some of these job interviews. So before we go into those tips though, we are now maybe 3 or 4 months into the shelter at home orders here in the Bay Area where all three of us reside. And in the meantime, you folks continue to interview and hire engineers. So now that a lot of these interviews have to be done remote, what do you like about this type of interviews and what don't you like about interviewing people remotely? Let's start with Karthik.
Yeah, the COVID situation has changed the norm of hiring actually quite a bit. Now, the norm has become a more remote hiring and remote workforce. It has become the center stage of several companies these days. So, I mean, we do used to have, from a hiring perspective, the first this thing is preliminary interviews and phone calls, and followed by in-person interviews, and then the hiring process starts of getting the approvals and shipping out an offer. So now with the COVID situation, so since everything has to be done in a remote or more on the video chat, so the phone calls and phone screenings are the usual. Then when it comes to actually in-person interviews, most of the interviews are in Zoom, and the questions that engineers tend to ask is more of a coding questions. And then there are tools like Codility and other few tools that help in testing the engineer's skill set from a coding perspective, algorithm perspective, and some kind of tools that helps in whiteboarding so that to keep the discussion more ad hoc and interactive. So those tools, they really help a lot, quite a bit. But the disadvantage of this one is you're not able to see the reaction, people's thinking in terms of how they react to certain situations and other things. More of a face-to-face, that kind of element is always missing. Then one of the other factors, once the offer ships out and the candidate gets accepted, once the candidate gets onboarded, most of the time, the people learn by interacting with people, and that element of the equation is missing because of the fact that the interaction is going through more of the computer-based tools. So, remote mentoring becomes a challenge, and unless the people take their own initiative, the new hires take their own initiative to interact, to get knowledge, then only they can improve. If they're expecting to kind of interact in a direct fashion, it becomes really hard to come up to speed. So that is a challenge that we need to address as a part of the remote hiring process and the remote mentoring as well.
So Arun, I imagine, so putting myself in the shoes of an interviewee, so one of the things that probably is definitely would be missing now is if you have an all-day on-site interview, at some point someone will take you out to lunch or a little bit of a more informal conversation. So that's all gone, right?
We do try to accommodate that in the sense to have a break where it's more informal conversation with the candidate, where the candidate can ask questions more about the company, any curiosities, outside the formal interviews, because typically the candidate has 5 to max 10 minutes in every formal interview. So, and then also, get some water or maybe have lunch, remote lunch together with one of the employees. So we do try to bake in that slot so that the interviewee gets a break.
So now, Arun, that you're several months into interviewing people mainly remote. So do you like it? Or do you prefer the in-person?
I mean, the bright side is that all the challenges with respect to scheduling. So like if the candidate is remote, to fit in the schedule, to have them fly in, that's many times delays things. So at least that is taken care of. Now, having said that, as Karthik mentioned, that in-person conversation is difficult to substitute. Like meeting the person, trying to assess, a culture fit, and being able to connect with the person. And what I do typically is that after the last interview, depending on how the conversations went, I then take the candidate around to have him or her meet with some of the team members so that the candidate can get a better insight about the team or the company. Now that is definitely missing. So there are some challenges, and definitely.
So we're also, because of COVID, we're in the midst of this terrible economic downturn and recession. And that hasn't spared the technology sector. So we've all read, we share with each other all these news stories of layoffs at leading tech companies and startups. So has the pool of candidates that you're coming across expanded and changed since we've had this economic downturn? So let's start with Karthik again.
So definitely the pool has changed. In fact, I see more talented candidates in the market because of the potential economic downturn that people anticipate. They wanted to get into a safety net of bigger companies. So from that perspective, definitely the candidate pool has increased, because then also the startup ecosystems investment is kind of in an uncertainty at this point. So, and if there are certain segments of the industries are not doing well, like restaurant industry, then people who are catering to that restaurant industry might be affected, and which means those talent pools are kind of constantly moving to find a better safe havens. So from that perspective, yes, definitely, like there has been a surge in number of candidates and surge in number of applicants that wants to come to bigger companies. So yeah, so that is what I think is happening.
Arun, you also you've been in Silicon Valley for several years, so you have a lot of friends, and have people been reaching out to you as well in terms of opportunities at larger companies?
Yeah, I definitely people, my first degree connections, and then like second degree connections, people have been reaching out, those who have been impacted, or making referrals of people who may have gotten impacted.
So the level of so you're also seeing a lot of experienced people.
Yeah, so as Karthik mentioned earlier, definitely compared to pre-COVID times, we have more experienced people in the pool. So as much as it's difficult for them, but for companies which are still hiring, they do get to talk to experienced people who were not available otherwise.
So with this in mind, then has this changed how you folks write your job ads now that you have in mind that the pool has changed and shifted, where there are more experienced people. Oh, so by the way, at a high level, so what are the kind of experience buckets that you place people in when you try to build a team and therefore write these job ads? So obviously there's the people who are new and maybe just come out of college or a few years experience, and there's the mid-career, and then the more experienced people, right? So in each of those cases, have you changed the way you think about how you write your job ads now that the pool of candidates has changed?
So at my end, not necessarily. So we try not to force fit like the candidate pool. We have pretty good clarity around our requirements. So that's why sometimes it may take 3 to 6 months to fill a single role. So if you need someone for a very large initiative, we may be looking for someone who has 10 plus years of experience. So now with this new development, the pool may be a little larger, but for smaller scope roles where we may be okay with a new grad or someone with 1 or 2 years of experience, we wouldn't necessarily tilt towards people with 5 years of experience, because it's a function of the requirement. Yeah.
So Karthik, do you find the experienced people, or I guess I don't know how to phrase this, overqualified people applying to lesser roles? Are there more?
I've not seen that aspect of it yet, but definitely there is more experienced people in the market compared to what we used to see before the COVID situation. And having said that, from a job perspective, depending upon the internal initiatives and the projects that we are taking on, we characterize what kind of people that we need at various levels. So from that point of view, the job description is geared towards the appropriate skill set, appropriate experience, and appropriate leader of the project versus starting with more of a fresh grad versus mid-level experienced people. So the ad is scattered towards the right positions as well as the right skill set that we need at that position.
So next question, still related to that top of the funnel, so job ads. So have things changed in the way you write job ads in light of COVID? Or that's one question. And then the second question is, what works and what's broken when it comes to job ads? So let's start with Arun.
So COVID hasn't necessarily influenced how we write job description, because again, as I alluded to earlier, that is driven by the requirements, and as far as the requirements are clear, then that really doesn't
But does COVID mean that in the job ad you say that we are now definitely open to remote?
From location perspective, definitely yes. More and more companies such as Facebook are more open to remote work. Absolutely. Yeah.
So to make my second set of questions more concrete, so what's a job ad? What kind of job ad works really well, and what kind of job ad does not work, based on your experience?
Yeah, many of the job descriptions, they're pretty high level, so it has value to highlight what the candidate would be working on, what the impact, potential impact would be if he or she were to join the company. But having said that, being a little bit more specific, that what kind of projects would the candidate be working on, and who all he or she would partner with. So one of the questions which I get asked consistently is whether there will be opportunities to collaborate. People really don't want to be siloed, particularly in today's time when everyone is working remotely. And imagine that you're a new hire, then you're ramping up on the culture, you don't know the resources, and let's say if you're stuck on something, whom do you reach out to? So highlighting that about the cross-functional nature of the role and what the company culture is with respect to inter-org or intra or collaboration to set up the candidate for success, I think that will definitely go a long way.
So Karthik, what kind of job postings have worked for you in the past, and what didn't work?
So I think in my view, the job description is essentially describe the skill set and also the number of years of experience in a particular skill set that you need to have, and also the ability to show some kind of interpersonal skills, including leadership skills, including self-initiative skills, and ultimately shipping or working in a collaborative environment, interacting and being social. Those aspects are the ones that we look for from a job description, so that the candidate can know what to expect actually. So now with COVID situation, things have changed in the sense as you pointed out rightly, working remote is a priority. And when you're working remotely, if the candidate is not mingling in a collaborative tool kind of environment, it's pretty hard to bootstrap the mentorship of the candidate, right? So that he can be productive within a certain amount of time. So which means we have to look for additional traits, like how self-initiated they are, how eagerly they want to collaborate, and how well versed they are with remote working tools like Slack, Zoom, and Google Meets, and Chat, Microsoft Teams, and all these various tools, and how easy for them to chat, and how good the writing skills are. Those things have changed quite a bit. I mean, one of the things in my experience that I found out is engineers are very reluctant to write design docs. So now in a collaborative environment, you need to write a design doc to communicate efficiently, because you can't say I did this way, because in-person meetings, it's okay to do that. But here everything has to be written very well, documented, before you can even start a project or even a small task that you need to do, right? So which means writing skills become more and more important these days.
Yeah, writing is like the new superpower in
Yes.
this remote world, right? So if you're a clear, concise, and relatively quick writer, you have a leg up.
Agreed.
If you're someone who labors over an email, right? So and then therefore delaying the communication, that's not so good. So speaking of job posts, so I think there have been studies which show that if you write a job post where you kind of signal, I don't know, senior data scientists who can do deep learning, reinforcement learning, blah, 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 using TensorFlow, PyTorch, all these tools, right? So bucket of things in the job description. I think studies have shown that you actually narrow your pool quite a bit, and then certain groups are a little more modest than others. So particularly maybe people from underrepresented minorities or women are a little more modest about how they think of themselves. So they're less likely to apply. So have you guys, in your organizations, have you looked at job postings as a way of also expanding your applicant pool? Arun.
Yeah, sure. Definitely, you, Ben, touched on a very good point. People um, tend to oversell in their resume, and I guess it may be an artifact of how the job descriptions are written in the first place. So it's not uncommon to come across resumes which are kitchen sink, like they will have pretty much all the buzzwords, yeah, you mentioned. So one of the, I think, good way to expand the talent pool is to be very, to segment the job description between skills and experience, and within skills what is preferred versus what is absolutely essential. And I think more than that, it should be more around that what people may be comfortable using versus having a good understanding. Like one of the things I have seen, that people will say, hey, deep learning, I mean, I have experience with deep learning because deep learning is pretty hot, right? And
I have 15
5
years
years
of
back it was
I have
machine
15
learning, and
years
then
of, Arun, I have 15 years of experience. But wait a minute. So deep learning has only been really in industry for 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, hire Ben.
yeah, you reminded me that there was a joke floating around that there was a job description asking for I think 10 or 15 years of experience in Swift, and then one of the guys replied that, hey, Apple announced Swift only 6-7 years back, so how would you find someone with 10 years of experience?
Yeah. So
So I
I
mean,
guess,
that's another thing.
yeah, I guess
Yeah,
Karthik.
go ahead.
So as Karthik, as I was kind of alluding to in my question, I think one of the ways you actually increase diversity in your engineering teams is to actually broaden the applicant pool for your job postings to begin with, right? So in that sense, then if you have if you carefully craft a job description, job description, then your pool of applicants gets broader, and so that increases the likelihood that you'll have a diverse pool to select from, or you'll have diversity in your candidate pool.
Yeah, definitely. Like that is a given because the given the fact, I mean, typically when I try to write the job description, I tend to gravitate towards writing more or less the exact requirements that we have, and also some adjacent requirements, so that the candidate pool, if they are experienced in that adjacent pool, they can pick up the on the primary skill set very quickly or learn very quickly because they are adjacent, right? So those are the two characteristics they look for. That tends to increase the diversity of the applicant pool. Now, having said that, from a diversity perspective, the actual candidates who are qualified, not qualified, qualified enough to even apply for those pools are even minimal. So because of that, it's we have to make a conscious effort to look for the diversity explicitly. So if minority is applying in some form or other, we have to look through it and see and give specific preferences to those candidates, so that they can tend to
Or be proactive and go out and
sure.
recruit, network with some of the groups in the Bay Area that I don't know, Arun, if you guys do this. There are engineering groups that are helping people from underrepresented groups land positions at leading tech companies.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we are pretty active in participating in such groups, and we are always looking for talent from underrepresented communities. Yeah,
All right.
and it's not limited to Bay. We also reach out to other such events throughout the country.
So let's get into the actual interview itself. So as I alluded to at the top of this podcast, some of the more popular links on our newsletters have to do with job interview questions and things like this. So there are now a lot of people who publish. Here are the top questions that Google asks engineers, or here are the questions that you should prepare for if you're applying for a web developer job. So to what extent do these lists of questions that people publish have you, well, because you folks are on the hiring side, you probably don't even bother reading these lists, right? So if you are familiar with these lists, are they useful or not? So Karthik.
Yeah, definitely sometimes useful, but also the downside is people would have already read the questions and they prepared their answers, and it doesn't really test their skill, right? So one of the things that I tell my engineers when they do the interview, take those problems, but transform that problem into different scenarios. For example, if a question that talks about equally splitting scheduling, can we apply that in the kind of load balancing kind of algorithms, right? So give a new situation which where the solution is pretty much the same. Whether if they identify that situation of equivalent, then they might be able to answer that question very well, right? If they have really understood what they have read in that questions. So that is one of the key things that we do. We also have some kind of a pool of questions that the group developed by themselves, which allows you to people to test their skill set. And usually the skill set testing ranges from coding questions to algorithmic questions to systems design versus interpersonal skills and collaborative. And with the remote being one of the aspects, probably we think we should be probably adding the writing skills as well.
So Arun, so what's your sense of these list of questions that get posted and shared?
Yeah, I think they're following the same pattern as the other category where, Google used to famously ask how many balloons you can fit in an airplane. Similarly, these canned questions are really not helpful. So I share the same thought process as Karthik. At least in my team, we try to tailor our questions to what's there on the resume. So if the candidate has said, hey, I've worked on load balancing, then it's okay, great, so tell me more about it. And they say, okay, you know what if you've worked on one data center, what if you had two, what if they are geographically distributed? So you just increase the complexity and see how they approach the problem instead of asking canned questions. Now things are a little more tricky when you have a new grad, because they don't have that industry experience. But even then, what we are really looking is how they approach the problem. It's not necessarily finding the right solution, but how they're approaching it. So these canned questions really are not that helpful in my personal view.
So Karthik, what's your take on coding assignments?
Coding assignments are always interesting because of the fact that there are multiple ways of writing coding questions. So given the fact that especially depending upon the experience level, people tend to write it in different forms. Because the reason why that happens is the new age of computer science graduates, they are so open to using code that is available in the open source. For example, if you ask how does the hashing work, can you write a program that involves hashing, then they will just use a hash map. But if you probe into what a hash map contains and how that implementation is, not many recently graduated computer science folks have the understanding of it. Whereas if you talk to experienced folks, because of the fact they learned that in the hard way, how the hash tables are constructed and all the various other aspects. So that goes into the zooming into one level down. But so that also means that the quality of the computer science education is kind of thinning down from my perspective. And there are some fundamental things that every computer science should learn, which is kind of changing constantly. And that is going to become a challenge in the future. But again, this is something that I've been noticing of late, last few years or so, that the composition of people and because of the demand in computer science graduates that are being hired, the schools are generating programs which will have an easy walk and get a degree in computer science and get onto a job. That
So Arun, are you a proponent of these coding exercises, coding tests during interviews?
I mean, it similar to what I said earlier. They do provide an insight into how the candidate is approaches a problem. I'm not a stickler around about
Some of
syntax.
these, Arun, some of these are even take home, right?
There are companies which who do give take home, and I'm completely in favor of it. Give open-ended problems, and as far as I'm concerned, even like, because it's a very high pressure environment, right? So I'm not a stickler about syntax. If the person can write pseudocode, that's fine. I'm more interested in what data structures they use, what is the overall algorithm, can they do time and space complexity analysis, are they diligent about the edge cases. That is, I think, more relevant than haggling about the syntax. Or I've heard stories where they require the code to compile in that specific time period. I think that's a bit of a stretch.
So, Karthik, knowing what you know now, years later as an engineering manager and someone who hires people, how would you prepare for an interview?
definitely, if I have to interview for an engineering kind of positions, I have to brush up my coding skills, and I have to brush up my fundamental computer science skills, and I have to understand the trade-offs between the choice of what to use and when to use, and also like ability to communicate the ideas clearly in a crisp way. And one of the things that some of the interviewers make the mistake is they go silent and they keep thinking in their mind and try to write the solution in one shot. But it will be more beneficial for the interviewer if the candidate talks about the thinking process. Hey, this is what I'm thinking. Explain the thinking process so that you can explicitly understand how that person is going in the right way, solving the problem. Or you can even give hints about, hey, this might lead to this. Why can't you try this way, right? So that is another kind of interview kind of nature that you have to do, like more be interactive in the nature of the interviews, and of course writing skills. Those are the various things that I would prepare for if I were a candidate today.
So, Arun, what advice would you give your younger self, your younger engineering self?
Yeah, one of the common feedback from recruiters is that candidates very often don't do well because they are underprepared. So one should not really rush, and especially if one is applying to his or her dream job, prepare the heck out of it, talk to the recruiter upfront about the company culture and the whole process, and one of the things which Karthik already covered, that's extremely important, and I think this is something the recruiter should coach the candidate upfront, that look, even if you don't know the solution, just you should think out loud, so that what the interviewer is looking for is not the solution but your thinking process. So thinking out loud is extremely important.
So, Karthik, let's say I'm applying for a job. It says we want someone who can use TensorFlow, but I use PyTorch. Or we want someone who can use Kafka, but I use Pulsar. And so you know what I mean. So not quite generally the same technology, but not specifically the technology that the company is using. Should I still apply?
Yeah, definitely. Because it's certain what we call as adjacent requirements, right? So as adjacent technology, as long as you are aware of the underlying concepts and the invariants of the technology underneath, so you will be able to adapt easily to those new technologies that you are exposed to. In fact, the people would quite a few of the applicants pool said when pose a question, they're often excited about something new that they want to learn, that even if it is in the adjacent space, right? Rather than in the same space what are used to. There are some candidates who just wanted to work on X means why I wanted to work on X only. But if the X and Y are very adjacent, then most of the people are open to working with Y. And because that also has advantage that you bring some new ideas into the from the existing system to newer systems, right? So that also helps a lot in cross-pollinating ideas.
So, Arun, do you hire people, and do you hire people who don't have the precise experience in the tool set you want, and essentially pay them to learn for the first few months?
As they say, you don't hire people for what they know necessarily, but for their potential. So, like PyTorch versus TensorFlow, Kafka versus Pulsar, these are great examples which you mentioned. So, and Karthik already covered it, that these are adjacent technologies. So as long as one understands the concept, so I mean, it's the same thing, Python versus R. As long as the fundamentals are there, one can pick up the language or a framework pretty fast. So I think because languages or frameworks, they are a means to achieving the goal or delivering the product. So as long as one has the understanding of the problem statement and has ideas how to solve it, I think that is more important.
So speaking of which, software engineering is a broad field. And let's say, Karthik, right now I'm a data engineer. I want to reposition myself as a machine learning engineer. So then I try to learn things on my own and maybe take even some online courses. But then when I actually apply to you, I don't have quite clear evidence of experience, right? So it's because I'm not doing machine learning on a daily basis. So how do I switch fields within software engineering?
So one of the things that I have seen in my 20, 30 years of experience in engineering is when you try to switch fields, you need to look for adjacents. Let us say, like if you are in a data engineer and you wanted to move to slowly into machine learning and other aspects of where the job market is pretty hard. So first of all, you work as a data cleansing and those kind of areas which are feeding into the machine learning, right? So which means you are getting exposed to those machine learning related stuff, right? And then you make those and then you acquire that skill set slowly. Then you slowly cut into that new field, and often it will be good advantage where
But Karthik, what if I don't have? I'm not in a position to demonstrate actual experience. I just have kind of practice or learned experience.
so it depends on if the candidate is qualified enough in one certain field, and all we are looking for is whether they have the initiative to learn, and if they have, if in the interview, if they clearly demonstrate that they're very eager and very proactive in learning new things, and if they can clearly demonstrate, as a company, we are willing to take a risk and on some of those candidates too. So that way, what happens is like it gives opportunity for the candidate to learn. By investing in the candidate, you that candidate also blossoms into something that the company wishes for, right?
So Arun, so we're airing this at the end of July, and obviously the class of 2020 college grads graduated in either May or June into an economy that we just discussed to be a challenging one. So do you have any tips for new software engineers and software developers fresh out of school, maybe have had one or two internships, but don't have actual experience yet?
Yeah, given the current climate with everyone working from home, I would suggest the new grads not to be discouraged, um, but prepare well, as I mentioned earlier, and then also, be it prior internships or projects at the university, also highlight that how um, they adapt within a team, because with everyone working remotely, teamwork is very critical. So to highlight their teamwork mindset and how they go about making the team successful instead of focusing on themselves, I think that will be a big plus.
But how do they? So Arun, do you have any tips for someone who's getting started in their career, doesn't quite have the professional network that we have? How do they? I mean, because right now they're just sending their resumes blindly into HR.
Yeah, I mean, it's those who have done internship, they already have connections, and then even on through LinkedIn, like even if there is a new grad who hasn't done an internship previously, presumably their friends would have had internship experience at one company or the other. So leverage second degree connections, and there are still plenty of companies which are hiring, because there's no dearth of work to do. Like um, be it you know large companies like Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Facebook, or even smaller companies like AR, VR is pretty hot, autonomous drivings, and even COVID has brought companies such as Zoom to the forefront, right? There are many startups which are working around remote conferences, right? So there's no dearth of um, positions, because there is a lot of work to be done.
So, Karthik, now that, as we alluded to earlier, the pool of candidates has expanded, um, has that changed the mechanics of your interviewing and hiring process in the following sense? You're a little more selective, conservative. So, whereas before you would have someone interview with 5 people, now you want them to interview with 8 people over 2 days because everything can be done remotely. So it's the process stricter and more rigorous.
Um, I would say yes and no. So some aspects of the process has changed because of the fact we are trying to have more remote interviews, right? So which means additional interviewers could give a more different perspective. More people talk to them, the more you get a good vibe about the candidate, right? So that from that perspective, things has changed. And the kind of interviews people do, depending upon your experience level. If you have already proven in the industry, the kind of questions that you go through will be very different from candidates who are fresh graduates, right? So that and again, we go through more interview folks because of the fact we want to have additional pair of eyes. So
by the way, let me stop you here, Karthik. So before, when it was in person, when I would go to an interview, there was a designated host, right? So who would guide me through the day. So now everything is remote. I just get passed from one Zoom meeting to another, right?
Yes, exactly. So like you have the probably if you have the 5 or 6 candidates, 6 interviewers are interviewing the candidate, you the recruiters set up these Zoom meetings and invites and everything. So you get onto the Zoom hop from one to another with some break in between, right? And of course, as a hiring manager, I get invited for a remote lunch so that during the lunch you can talk about company values and all these other aspects of what are the interesting projects and other things that we can work on. So those kind of exchanges happen. But again, it's usually with some short breaks, hopping from one Zoom to other.
So Arun, so have you folks changed the mechanics of how you interview? So in the sense of, as I asked Karthik, has it gotten more rigorous, more people are involved now that it's easier to bring people in because it's all Zoom, or it's pretty much the same?
No, no, it's pretty much the same. Like that, I think wouldn't make sense. That to compress, because I mean, the marginal value of going from 5 interviews to 6 or 7, it's not there, and then it's not that much. And the other thing is, even if the candidate is remote and may not be jet lagged, 5 hours is pretty a long time. It gets tiring. And then especially on Zoom, the Zoom has its or Skype or Blue Jeans, it has its own fatigue associated with it. When you're having a in-person conversation, you can take a coffee break, and so here you just have to, with a few clicks, you're hopping from one interview to another on video chat. So it can be pretty tiring.
So Karthik, we have an audience of data engineers, data scientists, and people just generally interested in technology. So if there's one thing that you want to be built to make your life easier as a hiring manager of engineers, what startup idea do you have as far as tools for hiring? And it could be at any stage of the hiring process, from the job posting, sourcing, all the way to interviewing. So is there a tool are there tools that would make your life easier, or are there parts of the process that drive you crazy?
Yeah, I mean, if it's a one word, let us say there is a global repository of resumes, then I give my job description, it immediately gives me, okay, this is the right candidate.
Or narrow down to
like 2 or 3.
Yeah. That's still so there's still right now. I think actually, Arun, my understanding is a lot of tech companies and startups, they still work with recruiters. That's still,
Yeah, they do.
it's, I mean, nothing has changed from 20 years ago, right? So
yeah, they do. I mean, the first round of filtering is based on keywords, and then the recruiters try to filter based on the inputs they have received from the hiring manager previously. So yeah, it's pretty manual right now.
So what about you? Is there any tool that you wish existed that would make your life a lot easier?
Well, I mean, I think maybe 10 years back, so LinkedIn did attempt to quote unquote standardize the resume format, but so there are a lot of challenges. So first of all, the titles vary significantly from one company to another within the same
Data scientist
domain.
Is kind of a meaningless term, right?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. Like everyone is a research scientist today. So the whole significance of scientists has just vaporized, right? But besides that, some company may call staff, some company may call senior staff. I mean, they have the leveling or the titles are very inconsistent. So to have a consistent mapping, and then also some sort of a quote unquote standardization on the resume. So one of the things which I find it very hard to parse is when someone says deep learning, has she or he a user of a deep learning framework, or have they developed new algorithms, or have they done any tuning? So providing that clarity of what they have done very concretely, and then quantify it that, hey, I improved this metric by X% using this algorithm. That flow is mostly missing. So then it makes it very hard to screen the resumes, because they come across as boilerplates.
So Karthik, if there's a tool right now that you recommend people learn, just to expand their ability to get picked up by tech companies, so what tools are high on your radar?
So
typically, besides Apache Pulsar.
I mean, like from a systems perspective, yes, there is a lot of the big data components from open source that you can learn quite a bit. So that includes messaging systems, streaming systems, then mini IO, S3s, and
Cloud, about
in
just
general,
cloud across all the different cloud platforms.
yep, and the trade-offs between them, or how they deploy versus how what are the states of differences between the two, and what are the trade-offs between them, and what is the cost factor? Because cloud, one of the major issues is how much it's going to cost me, right? Because it quickly the bill ramps up quite a bit. Then additionally, in general, like you like to look at the entire stack, not only focus on one area of the technology, try to see the entire gamut. For example, uh, people who know data processing versus low-level networking, they're very rare. So, like because since with all the distributed systems are coming into vogue these days, it is needed not only know how to partition your data, how to process the data in a partitioned manner. It also involves understanding the network, because network is what is moving the data across those nodes, right? So those kind of cross area skill set might be something it will be required, and it will be good to master those cross functional skills.
So Arun, what about you? Any tools that you recommend people learn?
Yeah, I mean, besides the ones Karthik already mentioned on the cloud side, on the more on the data science or ML side, having exposure to one of the languages like Python, or most people do have exposure to one or both of them. Then one either TensorFlow or PyTorch, and just get their hands wet with a few problem statements. And the good thing is that today we have forums like Kaggle where people can actually try out real world problems, where they can also get hold of data sets, and then I'll also see that what were the submissions of other folks.
What
And
about Arun? What about so one of the buzzwords now is ML ops.
yeah, that's also pretty.
CICD for ML, right?
Yeah, so that's also pretty hot, right? Like um, providing insights into model training, so that may help with interpretability or explainability on the inference side, that hey, I you go to Twitter, one of the tweets which pop up in your timeline, and Ben did not even look at it. He just scrolled past it, right? So it probably highlights that the inference is not working, or the model is not recommending a tweet which Ben likes. So this is just an example how ML ops can help to provide a feedback to the model that, look, the tweet which was shown, Ben did not spend even 2 seconds reading the tweet, let alone liking it or retweeting it. So there is a lot of potential on the MLOps side. Absolutely.
So to close, so Karthik, we are sheltering at home, no tech conferences, no meetups. How do I build my network?
LinkedIn, use LinkedIn.
That's it.
So yeah, I've been getting more and more LinkedIn requests from a lot of fresh grads who are looking at the profile, and they are
So let me ask
impressed.
you. Let me ask you this: do you accept all of them?
Because most of the grad students are looking for jobs. So I do accept them and
So
help as much as.
you're a nice person then, compared to me.
That is one of the things. Like I do continue to give talks at conferences, so that again the only way of communicating at that point, even
But
if you're virtual.
there's no networking at these virtual conferences, right? So
Yep,
before you'd come to Strata or one of these conferences, which had a great program chair.
agreed.
uh, And then, so the nice thing about physical conferences, the three of us can be talking and someone will come in out of nowhere, right? So, so there's no more of that spontaneity, right? So,
Exactly.
yeah.
But most of the time, when if you are talking in a virtual conference, people tend to connect with you, and you look at their profile and everything. Then you say, okay, it is worthwhile connecting that person. That's a way to kind of then you start a conversation there. I mean, the virtual conferences, some of the tools that I saw at Spark Summit were amazing in the sense like people can come in and go in the session and they can chat and all the various things like that. So I was pretty amazed about the kind of conversations that are flowing through it, right? Because the virtual tools are getting sophisticated enough to get closer to the physical conferences, right? Even though the physical element is not there, but it's getting closer.
You know, Arun, I was talking to someone actually recently, and the subject of virtual conferences came up, and believe it or not, we started talking about virtual worlds and avatars and Second Life, because basically at some point, I think if we're going to be locked down like this, maybe we need to have environments where we have something like that, where you can walk around, and I don't know, it just seems like networking right now is a bit of a challenge. I don't know how you feel.
No, it is a challenge, right? I mean, and we are in uncharted territory. Like such a worldwide lockdown hasn't happened in recent memory, right? So it is a big challenge. And we are not equipped. You know, yes, we have LinkedIn, we have Zoom, but hosting conferences at a worldwide scale, which can emulate the same in-person interaction, is going to be a big challenge. And not only on the tool or the product side of things, but also the network. Like going back to the remote interviewing, one of the big challenges is you can use whichever platform you want, Skype, Zoom, BlueJeans, is the network. You know, often, hey, sorry, can you say that again? Hey, what were you saying? You know,
Right,
so video is not working. So that's another big challenge. Not everyone has, a 50 gig connection, right?
So
I think like to augment what you said is we need some futuristic tool that includes AR and VR kind of so that the physical conferences are coming in the virtual reality kind of equivalent. So we have the physical interactions kind of equivalent, but we are not there yet. But these are all great applications for AR, VR.
Yeah. So let's close with a surprise question, having you guys recommend something you're learning, reading, or whatever. So let's start with Arun, just to surprise Arun. So any skill that you're learning right now, or book that you're reading, any recommendations?
Yeah, so starting this year, I put myself to a 1 book a month challenge. So I just finished my book for this month of June. It's around habits. I forget the actual name. I can look it up. Let's see. It's called. One sec. Let's see. The Power of Habit.
So you've been reading mostly kind of business books.
Yeah, The Power of Habit, why we do what we do in life and business. So yeah, it's a mixed bag. Business.
That's not a ringing
people,
that's not a ringing endorsement. We want a ringing endorsement. So let's skip you for now. Let's go to Karthik.
Okay.
I'm not getting
It can be Karthik. It can also be a skill or a programming language or something. That
yeah, that's what I was meaning towards. I was reading a book on Rust.
Yeah, that's hot.
Yes. So hot. I've been reading on the book on Rust and try to understand what are the differences.
So what's your sense of Rust, Karthik? Is it so obviously it's being used in production, but is it something that would be good to put on a resume at this point, or is it still kind of Bay Area bubble kind of thing?
So I think like the Rust as a language is pretty good. I liked it, whatever I read. There are some shades of languages that that can improve because it's not easy to understand for beginners in Rust, because there are some. The whole idea of Rust is the memory management is under the control of programmers without having to resort to some errors like C++ and other things, right? So it's all more compile time rather than runtime. So from that capability, there are some very involved concepts that you need to get, and once you get to those, then you are become proficient in Rust. But it takes some, as any programming language or any systems language, there's some minimum amount of time that you need to put in order to get into a cruise of that language, right? So that is again the same thing with Rust as well. But it's I like the language in general overall. It has a pretty structured aspect to it. Now the question is like how to develop systems. I've not seen the big systems written in Rust yet, but that
Oh,
trend is slowly.
there is one. Frank McSherry's new startup, right? So Materialize.
Yes.
IO, the time series database,
Yep.
built on top of Postgres. I think they are using Rust. I think. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So Arun, let's go back and now have you do a ringing endorsement of something.
Yeah, I mean, on the data science side, Python is the most prevalent language. So every single day there are tons of packages which are being uploaded. So it's just fun to play around.
Extra points if you would have said Ray too.
Right. Yeah, I mean that too, right? Yeah, I mean in reinforcement learning realm, it is the first thing which pops up. Absolutely.
Yeah. So Karthik Ramasamy and Arun Kejariwal, thank you. And I think a lot of people will enjoy listening to this, particularly people who are in the midst of looking for software engineering jobs, either as new software engineers or experienced ones. Thank you again.
Yeah, thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ben, for having us.